Hi there, and welcome to the Play Therapy Circle. Before we begin, please note this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It does not provide therapeutic advice, and listening does not create a client-therapist relationship. All views expressed are my own, and any case examples shared have been de-identified to protect privacy. If you're seeking personal support, please reach out to a qualified mental health professional in your area. Hi, and welcome to an episode of the Play Therapy Circle. I'm Kylie Ellison, a therapist, clinical supervisor, and play therapy trainer, and I'm so grateful you're here. This podcast is a space for thoughtful, soulful conversations about child-centered therapy, play-based work, and what it means to show up with presence and compassion, both for our clients and for ourselves. Whether you're a seasoned play therapist, a student just starting out, or someone deeply passionate about working with children, you belong here. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Play Therapy Circle podcast. I'm your host, Kylie Ellison, and I am so glad you are here. Happy Wednesday night, you guys. Woo. In true, congruent, living my tenets of CCPT authentic self, is it 10 p.m. on Wednesday night? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yeah, I've slipped a little bit here. The week has got away from me. How are you guys doing? How are you in your part of the world? And when I say part of the world, I mean that. We are now listened to in 22 countries, you guys. You as a listener are part of our international Play Therapy Circle community. How cool is that? It's so exciting. So if you are listening outside of Australia, I am so grateful that you are here and supporting and listening to this podcast. It means so much. And for those of you who've reached out and given such wonderful feedback about how much you're loving the podcast, I'm so glad. And I know I say that a lot, but I genuinely am. This is a passion project for me around living my tenets of CCPT, as Gary Landreth would say, and making sure that I am not just holding those skills in the playroom, but I am sharing it with as many people as possible. That has always been my mission and my vision and my values around connecting with those who also connect with this beautiful approach to working with kids. So I am so happy that we are reaching more and more people each week. So please feel free to recommend us to your friends and colleagues to have a listen as well, because we love sharing this podcast with you each week. And look, this is episode 14. So I've committed to this for like over 3 months, you guys. This is growth. I don't think there's many things I can think of where I've committed to it. If anyone's like me and has New Year's resolutions and usually fails at that by about week 3 in January, I see you. Okay, listen, I've got a really great podcast. Obviously, all of the episodes are great, right? But as we progress through each of the episodes and we get into more and more content, I'm loving all of this, and I hope you are too, because I want to dive into talking about the parent-therapist relationship in child-centered play therapy. So next week, I'm going to dedicate a very specific podcast to how to do parent consultations in CCPT, because for our beginning play therapists out there, I think that would be helpful. And even those seasoned would probably love it too. But I want to dive into all of the aspects that we consider as child-centered play therapists when it comes to connecting with parents, caregivers, and everyone in between, because I think we need to recognize that families all across the globe can look different. And so when I use parent, I just want to caveat this conversation by saying it is whoever is looking after and connecting and caring for a child that we're working with in play therapy. So definitely acknowledging all of the different versions of the definition of parent out there. But I think that this is something that comes up a lot in my connection work with supervisees. So I'm hoping not only for those beginning play therapists, but for those of you who've been practicing for a little while or for very long, this will be a nice reminder of the incredible work that we do. Before I dive in any further too, I just want to, in talking about the topic of parents and families in this episode today, I just want to extend so much compassion and empathy and understanding here when we're talking about our communities that we work in. I have been really struck the last couple of weeks, and I know I'm not alone in saying this, that I think many, many families in our communities right now are really struggling. And not only are they struggling, but the complexity of the presentations in the playroom, both with the child and with the family system, it seems to be increasing in the 10 years that I've been working in this space as a child-centered play therapist and over the last 20 years in child protection. I think that it's important that we start this conversation by acknowledging and recognizing that our families and our kids are struggling more now than ever. So if you're working in whatever role that looks like for you right now as a play therapist, whether that's in private practice, working for an organization, working as a contractor, whatever that role looks like for you, I have no doubt that a lot of you right now are experiencing real challenges and emotions in the work that you're doing with parents and families. And I want to dedicate an episode very soon on the rise of anxiety and depression in kids, especially in that 4 to 6 year old age group that we are seeing at the moment. So I will absolutely in the next couple of weeks do a very specific episode on what the research is telling us at the moment on our population, and especially the kids that we are serving in the playrooms, how incredibly stressed, distressed, and struggling that they are at the moment. And that goes and extends to parents and caregivers as well. And I think that that's really, really important. Connected with so many families in the last week alone, so many families that are genuinely at breaking point. And I don't think that that is uncommon or unusual. I think we are looking at symptomology of our greater population right now. And I also want to extend that to you listening as well. You also are important, and you also deserve that compassion and empathy, because it is not easy to be a child-centered play therapist right now with the communities we're serving. It is incredibly complex issues we are being engaged with and helping support children in the playroom to work through. So just wanting to start the conversation with that, because for any of you struggling as a child-centered play therapist with the level of complexity and the level of emotional intensity and just truly how tough our families are doing it at the moment, please know you are not alone. You are not alone. And I think that that's really important when we're talking about living and walking the talk as a child-centered play therapist, because Virginia Axeline set those tenets right all those years ago in the 40s that are so relevant to today around empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard. So please look after yourselves and give yourselves that grace as well, because we are definitely working with lots of challenging dynamics and presenting issues and complex family situations. So I felt that was important to acknowledge before we get started. So I think that what I want to start off with talking about, and I think when it comes to beginning play therapists especially, recognizing and truly valuing the importance of that relational foundation with parents. I think it's something that I want you, as you're listening to this podcast, to start to reflect on those parents or caregivers that you found challenging working with in CCPT. I always say that those challenges we experience teach us something incredibly valuable about our practice and make us better practitioners. So I always welcome that opportunity, if we are challenged in those relationships, to go deeper and learn more about ourselves as well as the client. So I think exploring and understanding how trust and respect and connection and empathy shape that parent-therapist dynamic. When we're talking about that relationship, and I know, again, as I was just about to say before, when we're talking about beginning in our journey as a child-centered play therapist practitioner, we can often be overwhelmed or certainly feel that imposter syndrome quite clearly. And trust me, that never kind of leaves. It's always there, unfortunately. It just ebbs and flows. But in the beginning, connecting with parents, we can do really well that connection of working with children in the playroom, but it can feel like a whole other scenario working with parents and caregivers. So again, I want to normalize that for you. If you are feeling a little bit overwhelmed or that imposter syndrome is creeping in, I see you. And let's talk it through. So that alliance with parents, I have so many thoughts about this. I want to align it with attachment theory here, because nothing happens in isolation, right? We're talking about attachment and connection work. We do that with kids. That is so important. We spend the beginning of that exploratory stage in child-centered play therapy allowing the child to feel that sense of safety, trust, connection, understand how the therapy works, and understand the role of the therapist and how that interaction will occur. It's the same with parents. Can I plant the seed for anyone listening who is interested in looking at it from a different lens? Apply all of those principles that we've talked about in previous podcasts around that exploratory stage, the use of that connection work, and recognizing that we can't move into the second stage of child-centered play therapy until we have that relational foundation. It's the same with parents. It's the same. So I give you that invitation to spend some time building that connection. Because if you do, we know from the meta-analyses of child-centered play therapy research that we are more likely to have better therapeutic outcomes. The statistical significance is higher if we have caregiver involvement. So that is very important. So how do we build that trust when we're not in the playroom with a parent as such? They're not playing with toys while we're tracking them. It's different because we're using that verbal communication. Although I think that there is always a place for creative resources if you ever need to in engaging and connecting with parents. However, when we're building that trust, it's definitely built on those principles of attunement, consistency, and communication. As a bit of a tip, I guess, around how I navigate this, I always, in that initial parent consultation before we start work with a child, and like I said, we're going to go through that, the initial consultation and what that looks like, and parent consult updates in the next episode, in episode 15. But for now, when we're talking about that initial connection with parents, I am deliberately spending time at the beginning of that meeting, if you want to call it that, or connection, connecting with them. I've used connecting and the word connection about 10 times in that sentence, so let me clarify. I think it's really important to recognize, as we do with children when we talk about we meet the child when we immediately see them in the waiting room. in that very first session. The play therapy experience begins the moment we connect in the waiting room. It's the same with parents. So take the time and invest it in being sure to welcome them to your practice or to your space, whatever that looks like. Making sure they've got a glass of water, making sure they feel comfortable, welcoming them into your consult room. I also do things like ask them, did you have any trouble finding us? Did you have trouble getting a park? And then I'll usually start a bit of a conversation around that, the car park can be really hectic after about 9 a.m. Can be a bit tricky. So I'm so glad you found a spot and I'm so glad you found us. Just having that initial casual, informal conversation at the beginning, but always keeping to our tenets, right? So making sure that it doesn't feel forced or it doesn't seem insincere, because that's so important when we know from the research that clients will decide in that beginning moments with us if we are somebody they feel like they can trust. So really take a minute before you leave your consult room to go out and welcome them in the waiting room. Take a minute, take a breath, so you feel very regulated, aligned, and authentic, because that's so important. It means so much to parents to feel like they can connect with you. There is lots of strategies I use throughout my work with parents as well. So I will go into that in more detail in the next episode. But there's so many ways that we can begin to foster that alliance, but also then continue to build it. Because again, I want to recognize for parents, it is incredibly vulnerable for them to bring their child to therapy and then in that waiting room, literally transition that child to a therapist and send them into the play therapy room. That takes a lot of courage. And it's important for us to recognize that and honor that and acknowledge that to parents, to give them that comfort and safety that we are going to support their child and them. So I think that one of the pitfalls that beginning play therapists can fall into is maybe dedicating so much of their energy and time into delivering their play therapy sessions and making sure that their skills are absolutely on point. And that's so important. So I don't want to disregard that at all. But I think we can miss that in the beginning of our work, and definitely with experience, that confidence builds the more parents you work with. So I want to talk a little bit about that relationship in terms of how we view parents. So looking at parents as co-regulators and partners, not bystanders. So that is part of my philosophy, definitely, as a child-centered play therapist, and what drew me, among many things, to the approach is I never wanted to work with children in and of itself. I feel like that means that we are working in silos, for lack of a better term, and we're not working holistically and systemically. So this approach to working with kids in child-centered play therapy offers this beautiful opportunity for us not only to apply our principles to the child, but also to the parent. I always believe in that philosophy that we get the opportunity in the playroom to role model, as Gary Landreth would say, a socially acceptable relationship. I would argue that also applies to parents and caregivers. It's our responsibility to role model what a socially acceptable relationship looks like. I'm really passionate about the concept that, and I had a supervisor years ago tell me this, who was an incredible supervisor who I still sometimes connect with, and he shared with me, coming more from a different modality, but imparted so much wisdom to me, reflected that he works with children of all ages. And I say that often in my practice. It really truly stuck with me. And I don't know if that resonates for you. I'm going to put that out to everyone listening right now. Have you ever connected with a parent and thought, I can see what your childhood may have looked like? And I mean that in the most compassionate way. I feel like sometimes when I'm meeting for the first time and connecting with adults, it's almost like their inner child is also present in that conversation. It's really hard to describe, and I don't know if it's landing for anyone listening. So please feel free to share your thoughts in our Instagram post or message us on Insta, because I love hearing from you guys. But I don't know if that lands for you guys, but definitely lands for me. This idea that sometimes that inner child in parents that we work with hasn't quite been healed themselves. And there is certainly some things that are carried into adulthood. And oftentimes parents don't have necessarily that insight into that particular aspect of their work. So obviously we are the therapist for the child, and so unpacking that is not part of our role in supporting parents. But I offer that thought for any of you maybe potentially struggling with the parent that you have in front of you. Maybe take a minute to kind of notice what's coming up, or what you, I guess, pick up on in terms of some of that unconscious work that they may be letting you know about, unconsciously, of course. So that relationship is very, very important. I want to transition that topic into talking about and validating the parent's inner experiences. So that segued nicely, you guys. Look at me go. Amazing. So let's talk a little bit about the parent's emotional journey. When we are connecting with parents, it is so important to recognize and acknowledge and understand that parents often carry so much guilt and anxiety and grief and shame, all of those descriptors, right, about their child's struggles. And I think that sometimes that can present as defensiveness, it can present as resistance, it can present as limited insight. There's so many different ways, right, that it looks like. But I think, again, we have this beautiful opportunity as child-centered play therapists to role model our tenets of that empathy and unconditional positive regard, to recognize and acknowledge some of those feelings that they are coming to your consult room to talk to you, that they are also holding. And so when we have a child come to therapy, we know that they don't pick up the phone. The 4-year-old that you see in your playroom did not pick up the phone and book in for a consultation with you, right? We know that. It is the parent that, or stakeholder or another adult that has contacted us initially. And so we connect and meet with the parent, but I think it's important to acknowledge that oftentimes it has taken so much courage for them to literally walk into your waiting room. And sometimes as we go through the therapy journey, that courage is kind of called on again. Because throughout that journey, things get tough, things get hard, and we then have this opportunity and this role that we hold to hold that space for them. So I want to acknowledge that when children come to therapy and when parents pick up the phone and make a referral and book in to see you, it certainly can activate for them their own histories or vulnerabilities, like I was talking about earlier. When we are connecting with parents, though, I think there's so much importance around holding that space for them, because going back to how I started this episode, oftentimes, and I'm just finding this especially so at the moment, many of the parents that are coming to our consult rooms for those updated parent consults, so not necessarily at the beginning anymore, but when we're working with families who are literally coming at breaking point, and I genuinely mean that when I say that, you know, parents in tears because they are genuinely completely at a loss. And so it's important to recognize their journey. We're certainly holding space for that. It's not our job to fix. And I guess as a child-centered play therapist, I feel very comfortable in that space of not throwing immediate strategies to parents when they're showing their vulnerability or that emotional expression or just that struggle, but rather offering psychoeducation when it's appropriate, I often lean into Maslow's hierarchy of needs sometimes when that happens, that it's important that we recognize that they need their basic care needs met. And for many of our parents, they're not even doing that. They're not getting good sleep. They're not eating well. They're not taking care of themselves. They're not getting their own therapy. So that might be where we start with supporting some of our families, but also recognizing that this progress is going to be slow. It's going to be super slow. And we have that empathy that every parent's journey is different and that trajectory is different. So showing that empathy and compassion for them is so, so important. So that kind of segues nicely into some of our responsibilities in this space, because like I said, I really want to unpack what that initial consultation and parent consult updates look like. But just for this episode, I felt it was necessary to dedicate to that relationship and how we navigate it. And boundaries, roles, and ethics is all a part of professional practice as a child-centered play therapist. So it's definitely important to clarify our role, especially if you have been working in the field and you're passionate about working with families. It's very easy to slip into wanting to help support them as the parent therapeutically as well. It's even more so important that we clarify that the child is the client and the parent is the partner. So the child is the client and the parent is the partner. So they are partners with us in that therapeutic change, but the child is certainly our focus. So we have mechanisms in child-centered play therapy to protect confidentiality. And I think that that's really, really important. And we'll talk more about that next week when we're talking about doing those initial consults and how we explain that limits of confidentiality to parents. But really establishing that early and helping them to understand how sessions will go and how that information will be updated to parents, setting those guidelines in that initial consultation is really important. One of the things that happens though, and again, I just want to communicate how much empathy I have for parents and caregivers in the trenches of parenting right now, because it is rough. It is rough. I don't know if I've mentioned very often to you guys about my kids. It's not something I've mentioned too much, but I have 2 kids in the preteen and teen era. So any of you guys in the trenches of the teenage years, are you okay? Truly, are you okay? And are we going to get out the other side? I'm just asking because I'm not sure. So every stage of a child's and young person's journey is full of adventures. I'm going to make it strengths-based here, guys, and say it's full of adventures. Also trauma, no, I'm just kidding. It's the adventures. So we want to make sure that while parents are going through it, that they have adequate support separate to the work that we're doing with the child, and holding some of those boundaries, because certainly parents, when they know you're a therapist and they know you work with families, will want to pull you aside at the end of sessions and have post-session chats in the waiting room or in the hallway or a mini therapy session. That stuff happens on the regular, right? And so it's really making sure that we are holding those boundaries and letting them know, hey, this sounds like something that's really important. Let's book in a time to chat further, so that we are just really navigating that boundary to ensure that we are dedicating that time to the child and then connecting with the parent in that psychoeducation support partnership space as opposed to therapy space. So we're certainly acknowledging too the ethical dilemmas that come with working with parents alongside kids. I always, often say, and I don't know if this is necessarily completely accurate because I live in the child counselling space, but I imagine for adults in the adult counselling space, it's a little bit easier because you don't have the client and then the client's mum. It is certainly harder when we're working with kids. We have that dual relationship of both parent and child. So we often wonder, would adult counselling be easier? Probably not. But when we're navigating some of those ethical grey areas, we have things like separated families. And we're going to talk about that in upcoming episodes, guys. Promise. We have reports and the information we share in reports, advocacy work, and what that looks like in our role. So there's so many different areas to consider, and way too many for one podcast episode. But what I want to talk a little bit about before we wrap things up is this idea of how we view that partnership that I mentioned earlier. When we're talking about how we can frame that relationship between ourselves and the parent or caregiver, I think a lovely way to do that is really around that collaboration and empowerment, because there is so much incredible gains we can make when we are able to work successfully with parents alongside kids. So very much framing them as the allies. I find, and again, this goes to our roots of child-centered play therapy living in Carl Rogers and person-centered therapy, but I very much acknowledge with parents at every turn in the communication that I'm having with them that they are the experts in their lives. And then additionally, I'm putting an extra caveat on that to say, you are the expert in your child's life as well. And not in the sense that they know what's best for their child. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But more so that they have lived that experience of raising their child. I haven't as the therapist. So they truly are the ones that certainly know a lot more about their child than I do, and are the ones that began that primary connection, primary caregiver attachment in that first couple of years of life, not me. So I really want to acknowledge that they are the allies here, but they're also the experts. I always, in my conversations with parents, are inviting curiosity and understanding from them so that they truly feel like they are being acknowledged and honored and recognized for the work that they have done up until this point, until I've connected with them. So oftentimes when I'm seeing things in play therapy, when I'm posing that or giving that information back to parents, I'm posing that as a curiosity to them. And I'll certainly explain more in the next podcast, but I want to explain that point for a second, that say I'm saying something around learned helplessness. That's a really easy one. When we're talking about presentations in the playroom, so we might see the child really struggling to make decisions for themselves, not being able to do anything for themselves, make decisions, take initiative, any of that. None of that exists in the playroom. So we have a parent consult update, and one of the ways that I want to honor them as the allies in this process is saying to them, I've noticed in our sessions when I've been working with your child that one of the things that has been coming up is this topic that we like to talk about in play therapy called learned helplessness. And at that point, I'm giving a bit of a definition to help them understand. But then I'm saying to them, look, oftentimes outside of play therapy, it can look like kids really struggling to do things for themselves, or just really struggling to have that kind of confidence to initiate things or follow through. Is that something I want to lean into your incredibly valuable knowledge here? Is that something that you've noticed? Help me, I guess, understand a little bit more what's happening in the playroom with anything you can share. And so I'm really holding them in the lead. I'm honoring that they are certainly partners in this process, and that it's not about me having the answers, but us working together. So that collaboration and empowerment. So involving them in a meaningful way. Certainly, absolutely, all the time recognizing those strengths that they have. That sandwich technique that we often use in therapy, giving a positive, kind of raising potentially something that we need to work on, or I like to say an area for improvement, and then giving them a beautiful strengths-based reflection at the end so that it really does honor their role in this space and their strengths. And certainly highlighting and celebrating any small shifts outside of play therapy that has been part of their willingness to try new things and willingness to learn. That's so important that we honor that and recognize that and acknowledge that. Encouraging connection rituals outside of the playroom. So whether they can at some point be able to engage in filial therapy, for example, or just that connection time, 30-second bursts of attention that we talk about in filial. Any sort of, I guess, attempts by the parent to build that connection and help support their child is so incredibly important to acknowledge. Again, in the community context of so many of our families just struggling day to day. So asking them to do anything is incredibly important for us to recognize that sometimes that is difficult and that progress might be slow, but when they do make those wins, we're going to celebrate it with them. Certainly empowering them through curiosity, not instruction. That's the example I gave just before. I truly love sitting in that space because it honors and follows our modality, but truly at the core, our principles of our Carl Rogers person-centered approach, that we are not the experts as the therapists. It's far from it. And we are constantly always learning, and we can always learn something from our parents and caregivers as well. So really acknowledging their collaboration in this. So what I want to wrap up this topic by talking about, I should really check the time, you guys, as well. Wow, 34 minutes. Yep, this is going to be a long episode. I hope you guys are still here. Are you still here? Thanks for being here if you are. Thanks for listening while I talk. I want to invite, in that curiosity approach and curiosity principle, your own self-reflections as a listener, as a therapist working in this space, learning about child-centered play therapy, whether you've been a beginning play therapist or somebody who's been doing it for a minute. I want to offer some reflective practice and self-awareness exercises here, and certainly some questions for you. So I think it's really important when we're working with parents and caregivers to notice our own triggers, our own biases, and our own emotional responses. We are just as important as the child in that relationship in the playroom, and it's the same in our interactions and our relationship with parents in parent consultations. And what does that look like? Countertransference, you guys. We can never avoid Freud. Well, that rhymes. I should put that on a t-shirt. You can never avoid Freud. You can't. Countertransference lives and breeds in the everyday interactions and connections we have. Notice if there is countertransference coming up for you in your work with parents. And what do we do? What's the antidote to countertransference? Well, there's lots of different things, but one of them is clinical supervision. Talking it through with your incredible supervisor, whoever that is, helps you to process those relational dynamics safely. So it's not your own triggers or biases aren't infiltrating into that relationship with the parent or caregiver. You can really process that separately with your clinical supervisor. So making sure that we recognize when we are feeling frustrated, irritated, judged, ridiculed, on the back foot. There's so many different ways that we can feel in those interactions with parents that can get us wondering about that relationship and just what's going on for us and what's going on for the parent. So getting that perspective is really important. And that the parent relationship often mirrors the therapist's growth edge. What a cool statement, right? The parent relationship often mirrors the therapist's growth edge. So I think sometimes, certainly that transference and countertransference lives and breeds in the experience and relationship with a parent or caregiver. But often when we are feeling the most tested in the playroom is also when the child is feeling that need to switch and to be able to shift into that next stage of play. So it's almost like unconsciously we really pick up on those really intense feelings and moments for children. And I believe that also happens with parents. And I think that parent relationship can really take a journey. And I would often argue everything can be related to child-centered play therapy, right? So we can look at that relationship between ourselves and the parent as following through the stages of child-centered play therapy, right? Because we can look at the beginning, that exploratory stage with ourselves and the parent, where there's getting to know each other, getting to know how this works. And then once that happens and we've established the beginnings of that foundation of trust and safety, we then start to see a little bit of testing, a little bit of resistance, a little bit of difficulty, uncomfortable feelings, all of that lives in that next stage of the parent-therapist relationship. We then move into, when we've moved and processed those feelings together, we then move into that third stage, which is all around connection, relationship, vulnerability, rawness that comes up in the third stage. And we generally see that with parents as well in that journey, because we're not working with parents over just a couple of sessions. This is a long process for both the child and the parent. And when we move towards mastery in the playroom, we also see that kind of mirroring when parents feel like they've got enough tools in their toolkit, they've got enough psychoeducation and strategies, and they've maybe been practicing it. They've had some success at home. They've been able to deliver some of those skills, say reflecting feelings or the ACT model, and they're feeling empowered in themselves. It's awesome. We can relate all of this to child-centered play therapy. So maybe that might be a tool for any of you listening who are feeling a little bit stuck in your relationship with parents. Try that. Map it out a little bit of that journey along those stages for however many episodes you've been working with the child and where that sits, because that may just give you a little bit of insight. Because if you can pinpoint it and go, oof, I think we might still be in that second stage in that work that I'm doing with the parent. What do we do when we see a child in that second stage? We recognize that this is so much about really trying to test, are we somebody that's going to stay consistent in their life and hold space with them? Because again, we meet children of all ages. So whatever that is that's connecting with the parent is important to look at through that lens. So we can have that deep empathy for them, that it's not about us in terms of their reactions or the difficult emotions that are coming up, but it's all part of their journey. And what are they needing from us to help them feel that safety, trust, and connection? So cool when we can do it that way. So I invite you guys to try that in your work if that's something you're interested in doing. So what did we talk about, guys? I'm looking at the time again. It's 41 minutes. This is probably the longest episode I've done so far. And we are approaching 11 p.m. 11 p.m. It's time for me to finish this episode. So again, thank you if you stuck around. So what have we talked a little bit about today? We've certainly talked about the relational foundation, the parent's emotional journey, what those boundaries look like for us as a therapist with a parent, the importance of that collaboration and empowerment, and certainly our own inner experience, what we notice comes up for us, and how we take care of that. So the parent-therapist relationship is therapeutic in itself. It models safety, acceptance, and patience. So I want to leave you with this question around your work with parents. For those of you who are currently working, you're at the beginning of your journey, or you're a seasoned play therapist. Think about one parent relationship that has shaped your practice, and what did it teach you? Because all of our clients are our teachers, right? So even parents can teach us something incredibly important about our work. Hey, I hope this was helpful for those of you listening. I love doing these episodes. I love talking about child-centered play therapy. I can talk about it all day. But it's time for me to wrap this episode up. So thank you so much for being here. We love to hear from you. We would love to hear where you're coming from. Are you in another country? Are you outside of Australia? And if you are, I am so thankful you are here. Thank you so much for the support. So please check us out on Instagram. We're at the Play Therapy Circle podcast. That's our handle. We post every week when we drop our episodes every Friday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your good podcasts from. So please feel free to follow along with us, drop us a review, or chat with us on the Instagram. We love to hear from you. Oh my God, I just said the Instagram, which shows I'm a geriatric millennial. I apologize. That is terrible. Next week, what's the plan? We are going to do and talk through how to do an initial parent consultation and follow-up parent consultations. So this is one of those ones next week that you can save and go back to whenever you need. It will be very much talking through those skills. But it's time for me to go. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all of the love and support. Please, please, please take care of you and each other. And I will talk to you again next week. Bye for now. Bye. Thank you so much for being here for another episode of the Play Therapy Circle. If anything resonated with you today, I'd love it if you could follow the podcast, share it with a colleague, or leave a short review. It really helps others find our circle. And if you have a topic or question you'd love me to explore, I'd love to hear from you. This space is for you, and I want it to feel like a conversation. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, you belong here.